Hello friends, welcome to Avatar Technology Extra. Today we're lucky to introduce you to an intriguing figure such as Aubrey de Grey, the British researcher who claims he has drawn a roadmap to defeat biological aging. He provocatively proposes that the first human beings who will live to 1,000 years old have already been born. You said that medicine is able to completely defeat aging within the next 20-30 years. So
Probably. I'm not sure, but probably.
So where does your confidence come from?
Well, really, it's all from the details. I know a lot about what we can already do in the laboratory, and I know what we need to do to defeat aging entirely, or at least I think I know. I think that we have really only 7 big problems to solve, and we're already progressing very rapidly in solving all of them. Until we solve all of them, we will probably only extend healthy life by 10 or 15 years at most. But once we get all of them reasonably well solved, we should be able to reach what I have called longevity escape velocity, and essentially keep people completely youthful like you and me for as long as we like.
Does achieving immortality means overcoming physical death?
Well, first of all, no. I do not like to use the word immortality. Really, the answer to your question, as you have stated it, is yes. Immortality does mean overcoming physical death, and that's not what I work on. I'm just a medical researcher. I'm just doing normal medical research to keep people healthy for longer than they would normally stay healthy. And if I and my colleagues at SENS Research Foundation are successful, then yes, there will be a big side effect that on average people will live a lot longer. But it's just a side effect. I don't really even work on longevity, let alone immortality. The mechanisms that we think will be able to prevent aging are repair mechanisms. They are ways to restore the molecular and cellular structure of the body to something like how it was at an earlier age. So the reason we need repair is because the body damages itself. And this is not really a feature of biology even, this is just a feature of normal physics. Any machine with moving parts is going to damage itself as a side effect of its normal operation. You know, a car accumulates rust and so on. And eventually there is more damage than what the machine has been set up to tolerate. So eventually the door falls off the car or whatever. Now, it's the same for the human body. And lifestyle is a little bit important. Certainly it's easy to shorten your life by smoking or by getting seriously overweight, for example. But mostly, if we live a reasonably good life, with a reasonably balanced diet and so on, the main things that cause the accumulation of damage are not lifestyle. They are the non-negotiable things like breathing. You've got to breathe, right? But it's really bad for you because it creates free radicals which damage your DNA and so on. Because this is a divide and conquer strategy where we have these 7 problems to solve, we have lots of different projects. In our facility in California, we have 2 major projects active, and in universities around the USA and also one in the UK, we have various other projects. So nearly a dozen projects working on all of these various problems. And in each case, we are making good progress. We are publishing interim results. For example, just last week, we had our first paper in Science magazine, which is the world's most important science publication. We are, in general, doing the most difficult parts of this problem. So the parts that are at the earliest stage. And for that reason, the results are not necessarily very exciting to non-scientists, but we know that we are really making good progress. The 7 problems are very easy to describe. The first one is cell loss, cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. The second one is having too many cells instead of too few, because cells are dividing when they're not supposed to. That's pretty much exactly what cancer is. The third one is also having too many cells, but not because they're dividing when they shouldn't, instead it's because they're not dying when they should, which is something that most people don't think of, but it turns out that especially in the immune system, it is important for cells to die, and in old age they're not so good at it. The other 4 are at the molecular level. So there are 2 inside cells. Firstly, there is the accumulation of mutations in the mitochondria, which are this very important part of the cell that does the chemistry of breathing. Then there is molecular waste products, just garbage that the cell creates and that it does not know how to destroy or to excrete. So those things accumulate and they cause diseases like atherosclerosis or macular degeneration. And then there are 2 things that happen outside the cell, in the spaces between cells. First of all, again, there is molecular waste products, things like amyloid that you see in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. And then finally, there are crosslinks. There are molecular bonds that form between the proteins that make up the extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is a lattice of proteins that gives our tissues their physical properties, their elasticity and so on. And when that elasticity is reduced, you get some things like high blood pressure.
Will there ever be tests on humans?
Certainly. The whole point of this is to get to human tests eventually. In some cases, we're already there. So the easiest parts of this whole range of problems are the treatment of cell loss. Because there, the treatment is simply stem cell therapy, which is a big field, of course. Lots of people are doing stem cell therapy. And some of those experiments are already in the clinic, in clinical trials, including for aspects of aging. Parkinson's disease is an example. It's caused by the loss of a particular type of neuron in a particular part of the brain. And there are clinical trials to use stem cells to replace those neurons.
So has the perception of aging changed lately?
I think that it has. I think that we are seeing a much more positive conversation about the possibility of bringing aging under medical control than we saw in the past. Actually, I think that Russia has been rather ahead of the game in this. I think that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I first started doing this, the conversation in the US and the rest of the Western world was really more like, people would ridicule the idea. But I never had that in Russia. Even back then, when I would come here and when I would talk to Russians, it seemed that you guys understood the logic of it much better, yeah.
Is it any easier these days to raise funds?
It's getting a little easier to raise funds, but still it's very, very hard. Still, a lot of people don't really know whether it's time to commit to a particular strategy. So, we say that we have this particular strategy, we explain why we think it's likely to work and so on, but ultimately it just takes a long time to convince people, especially wealthy people, that a particular area, a particular team is the right team to be supporting. We're getting there though, we're getting there.
So the most frequent objection to immortality is that humanity doesn't really know how to identify a long life. So people don't really know what to do on Friday evening, and we offer them immortality, so to say. So how do you feel about that? What's the controversy behind it?
Well, yeah, I think it's a really stupid thing to say. I think the idea that boredom is a reason not to stop people from getting sick makes no sense at all. I don't meet people who want to get Alzheimer's disease. I don't even meet people who think there is some age at which they will want to get Alzheimer's disease, right? So, saying, oh dear, people will get bored if they live longer, let's not cure Alzheimer's disease, come on.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that I'm finally getting through to people, and not just I, but the field is finally getting through to people, is that there is no real difference between aging itself and the diseases of old age. If you make that artificial distinction between those two, then it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, these diseases are very bad, let's cure them, but aging itself is some kind of natural thing that we ought to leave alone. It's complete nonsense. In the West, the most common complaint or concern that I tend to encounter is the possibility of overpopulation, that we would have too many people, we wouldn't know where to put them. And of course, it's reasonable to predict that in the long term, if we completely defeat aging and people don't die of aging anymore, and people carry on having the same number of kids that they have now, then we will end up with more people than we would have otherwise. But the first question we must ask is, would people necessarily have as many kids as they have now? I mean, we're already seeing that people are having fewer kids as their prosperity increases, and just out of choice, not because they need to have fewer kids. The second thing, it's even more important, is that the problem of overpopulation is not simply a problem of having a certain number of people. It's a problem of having more people than the planet can sustain, and that number changes as a result of technology. For overpopulation, we have to always remember that when we improve technology, when we improve renewable energy, for example, so that we can reduce fossil fuels, and when we improve agriculture, so artificial meat, for example, it's not very good yet, but quite soon it's going to be very good indeed, and it will mean that we don't need so much land to grow meat, things like that. So the number of people we can have on the planet without environmental impact will increase much more rapidly than the number of people itself will increase. Therefore, the whole concept of an overpopulation problem is completely misguided. Another problem people have is, oh dear, only the rich will have access to these therapies.
That was my next question.
Right. Now, the funny thing is, people will give that objection, and they'll also give the overpopulation objection at the same time, without even noticing that the two things are obviously mutually exclusive, right? But anyway, so yes.
So will it be expensive?
Well, so the thing about this is that not having these therapies is incredibly expensive. At the moment, I don't know the statistics in Russia, but in the West, in your typical Western country, about 90% of medical expenditure is on the diseases and disabilities of old age. So if we have therapies that stop people from getting that way, even if those therapies are quite expensive, still we will be spending much less on medical care.
See.
Yeah. Furthermore, the people who are getting this medical care, because they are still youthful, they will continue to be contributing wealth to society, right? Whether in the normal workforce or in any other way. So, again, we will be more prosperous, which means that, of course, I could say, well, if people are going to regard this as a human right, there will be a humanitarian pressure to pay for this for free out of taxation. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but I'm not relying on that. The point is, even if that's not true, the sheer mercenary economic imperative will be that any government who doesn't make these therapies available, irrespective of the ability to pay, to anyone who's old enough to need them, any government that doesn't do that will go bankrupt pretty quickly, because they will be so much less prosperous because of all the money they're spending on the people who are not getting the therapies.
So what's your take on the prospects of technological immortality?
You mean non-biological?
Using uploading or full-body prosthesis?
Mm-hmm. So uploading is, of course, a very ambitious concept. It's not obviously completely crazy. There are various ways in which it might theoretically be done that do not seem to me to be either physically impossible or philosophically pointless. It would be philosophically pointless if the person that was uploaded was not the same person in some way. But there are ways to get around that, I think. So, yeah, it's not crazy, but it's very, very, very difficult. I, at this point, think that we will achieve complete elimination of aging using normal biotechnology a long time before we get anywhere near being able to do uploading. Of course, if we could do genuine uploading, if we could transfer our consciousness to a computer substrate, then we would have much more straightforward control over its health. We could, of course, put this computer brain into whatever type of body we liked. We could do all manner of things to back it up, to make sure that even if it got, corrupted in some way, that it could be repaired. Lots of things would be very different. So in that sense, we could say that it would be a better way to protect the body, to make sure that it was not exposed to risks of death that are not to do with aging. But actually, I'm not so sure that that's true, because the thing about risks is we always have ways to address them. For example, if we develop very strong artificial intelligence with, robots that do everything we want, then we will be able to protect ourselves from pretty much every risk. We are already seeing the beginning of that with things like self-driving cars, which we know will be much safer than normal cars. And it will apply also to infections, for example, pandemics. At the moment, we don't spend nearly enough money on the development of vaccines, but we could. And if we had better technology, that money would be very effective. We just wouldn't get infections anymore. And all of these things, are true. So I mean, even if you go beyond that, you look at, for example, asteroid impacts. We aren't spending nearly enough money detecting asteroids, but we could. And we could completely protect ourselves from any risk of the Earth being hit by an asteroid. If you look further in the future, you might think, well, one day a supernova will go off nearby and everyone will be toast. Even the uploads will be toast, right? But actually, that's not true. Because if you do the calculations, you think, well, okay, how near would a supernova need to be? And how likely is it that the supernova will happen in the next, let's say, 10,000 years? You can do those calculations, and it comes out very unlikely indeed, right? Now, 10,000 years is a long time. I think it's pretty much certain that within 10,000 years, we will have technology that can go out into outer space and defuse stars that are close to blowing up. So even that,
Do you consider yourself a transhumanist?
Not really, no. I really just consider myself a completely boring medical researcher. I just want to stop people from getting sick.